Hey, everybody, welcome back to Off the Chair, the show where we talk about what happens when therapists stop trading time for money and start building businesses, systems, and lives that actually work for them. I'm your host, Dr. Colleen Long, and today's guest is someone who's been leading this conversation long before it was popular. Gordon Brewer, LMFT. Gordon is the founder of the Practice of Therapy podcast, the PsychCraft Network, and the group practice Kingsport Counseling Associates. He's spent over 30 years in this field, not just helping people in the therapy room, but helping therapists themselves build sustainable, meaningful practices. Today, we're talking about how to make that shift from clinician to entrepreneur, from overbooked to intentional. Gordon, thanks for being with us.
Well, good to be here. Thanks, Colleen.
You are a legend, and I've listened to every single podcast that you've done. And I just have to say, from a personal note, and I talk pretty frequently on here about my own sort of burnout story, and things got pretty dark for a while in terms of just with the Change Healthcare breach and having over $250,000 in payroll that was due, and just trying to keep everybody employed and wondering how I was going to do that, all while having my house tied to the business. And I remember it was around this time last year, and I was like, really, you want to be in the holiday season, right? You want to kind of shift into that mode and take a little step back. And I was not there. I was in another sleepless night, and I was listening to your podcast, and it was like your voice was so calming, and you were talking about all of the stuff that I'm struggling with, and I think a lot of people are struggling with, but it was just like, yeah, it's going to be okay. It was just such a nice, like, lighthouse in the storm. It was really, really nice. So I'm sure it's not the first time you've heard that feedback, but it's really good, I think, for therapists as they're coming into their careers. And we've done that sort of a decade long now practice where you kind of look up and go, am I going to keep on doing this, or do I want to maybe shift to hear your voice, which is this like, okay, it's going to get rocky, but here's where I landed.
Right. Well, you're so kind to say all of that. I'm always just kind of blown away when people make those kinds of comments. As long as I've been doing this, I've gone through a lot of different seasons. And I think that's the way I like to think about it, is that we move through life, move through our practices and all of that. And I think it's important to, and people hear this all the time from me in my podcast, is to figure out what is your why and just keep yourself grounded in that as best you can. And it gets messy, it gets hard at times, and so you move through all of that.
I know that you were working in nonprofit for a long time, and then you ended up shifting into private practice. And then later, I imagine after private practice, there has to be, and maybe this is my own projection, but after you're meeting with client after client, you start to realize there's a ceiling here. There's only so many hours in the day. Was that the shift for you, that you started to create these other forms of passive revenue or income streams and sustainability?
Right. The evolution for somebody, particularly if you start out in solo practice, the evolution of that, and usually what we refer to as a low-hanging fruit, is to somehow or another move into group practice so that you are referring to others, but also creating income for yourself with that by providing a space for people to have a place to practice and all of that sort of thing. And so I think that's kind of a first place, but also just recognizing what are the things that you are passionate about. And it might be outside of just specifically doing butt in chair therapy and that sort of thing. But one of the things that, and I think for a lot of us that get into kind of the consulting coaching space, is we find out that people start asking us a lot of questions about, well, how did you do this? What did you do? And all of that sort of thing. And so it was a natural evolution of just, okay, these are the things that I've put together. This is how I've done it. It's not necessarily the best way, or there are lots of different ways to do what we do. And so really figuring that out and then sharing that with others. Kind of one of my taglines is I've learned a lot the hard way, and I don't think everybody else has to do that. And so I began sharing that with people. I think early on I created a course. It's still out there, but I really got fascinated. And again, this goes with the passion of using Google Workspace and how you could use that in the context of private practice because it's not designed specifically for that. So I put together a course on how I've used those tools and the way I like to tinker around with things. And so put that together and then put that out there, and it got some traction and people were buying the course and doing all those things. So those are small ways, but I would say for anybody that is at that place where they're feeling burned out is to really think about, okay, what is their why? Why are they doing what they're doing? If it feels like you're doing too much and that's getting overwhelming, the big thing I think is to look at how you can outsource the things that you don't enjoy doing. In other words, pay somebody else to do it so that you can spend your time on things that are really going to bring you income and do things in that way.
I think most people have a lot of great ideas about what they want to do or what that would look like, but it's the execution of it. It's the rollout of that. And you talk a lot about, I mean, at one point you hit 400 episodes, right? So you've been doing the podcasting thing way before people were, podcasting was on trend, right? I have to imagine that there's a lot of, you're just doing this thing and you're putting this out there in the air, in the ether, and you have no idea if anyone's getting anything from it. You don't know if it's working. You're like, I don't know if this is a good fit, but you keep doing it over and over. Okay.
Yes.
Tell me about that. Like, what is that about you? Is that your Enneagram type 2, wing 3? Is that, what is that piece of you that keeps going despite there's no external validation telling you to keep going?
That is a great question, Colleen, and nobody's ever asked me that. But I think as much as anything is that I do get feedback from people. Every now and then somebody will email me or message me and say, that episode really helped me, or that sort of thing. Or when I go to conferences and people start talking to me and just kind of validate what I'm doing. And I'm just doing it in my style. I mean, it's kind of like you do, kind of like throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. But I think as much as anything, it's just doing what you feel passionate about. And as you mentioned, Enneagram 2, the helper, I love helping people. And this has just been a platform that I started. And I think as much as anything, I tell people this too. The key to doing anything successfully, I think, is just being persistent and consistent with it.
Yeah.
And so when I started the podcast, I wasn't sure if I was going to keep doing it or not. I've started a second podcast. It's something I'm passionate about, and I keep meaning to pick it back up. It's called the Kindness and Compassion Podcast, and it's still there. Of just having conversations with people around living into kindness and compassion and their spirituality and all those kinds of things. But as much as anything, one of the things that keeps me motivated in doing it is I get to, just have conversations just like this with different people from literally across the world. And I think because I have been consistent with it and made it to 400 episodes, when I first started, I said, no, I won't go that far with it, but I did. And then just having the systems and processes in place to where it just runs smoothly, and then having my great assistant, Rachel, who pulls it together. And I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I think as much as anything is that there's a part of it that just really brings me a lot of validation, a lot of joy, if you will, and just, being able to do this week after week.
Yeah. When we go through grad school, at least for me, it was like this sort of race, like you're socialized, you get through grade school and then middle school, high school, then college, and then you're like, what's next? And everything is this sort of brass ring. Like, I got to get to this next thing, head down. And I think for me, at least, the private practice, it was a while before I just caught my breath and was like, okay, is this what you want to do? Is this what brings you joy? And I wasn't even asking those questions. I was just sort of putting one foot in front of the other, like, okay, I am a psychologist now. This is what I do, and this is how I make money.
Right.
I found that, I think particularly in our profession, because our instrument is not like a stethoscope that you can just hang up on the door at the end of the day, our instrument is our heart, our soul, our mind, and all of our training. And you don't get to hang it up. You have to wear it for the rest of your life, for the rest of that day.
Right.
So you do get compassion fatigue. no matter how good you are at scaling that line between empathy and sympathy, you get that burnout, I think, if you are, seeing 25 to 30 patients every week for years at a time. And what you're talking about, that joy and letting joy sort of lead you by the nose instead of the next brass ring, is a big pivot, I think, for a lot of people that just kind of, we all followed the good student track.
Yeah, and I think it's our passions and the things that energize us and all of that change over time. I know it's shocking to everyone, but I'm approaching retirement age. But
Are you actually going to retire?
well, that's a good question. I mean, it's kind of like I don't know that I'll retire as much as I'll just fade away. But yeah, so thinking about, okay, how do I want to spend the next seasons of my life? As I shared on the podcast, when you probably heard, I went through a really big transitional time in my life and experienced the death of a spouse and moved through all of that. And so then you start thinking about, okay, I want to spend more time with my daughter. I want to spend more time traveling and those kinds of things. And so I think what happens is you shift how you spend your time, but also you look at the ways to continue to have income for yourself and really getting creative. And the creative part is what I find fun, is just trying to figure out, okay, what's a different way for me to go about doing this?
Yeah.
What's the better mousetrap here with all of this? And there's so much stuff that we know as therapists about just life in general and things that are important to us that other people find interesting as well. And so figuring out what those things are. Shout out to my good friend Lisa Mustard, who has the therapy show. I think she's still doing, I think she took a little bit of a break from it. But one of her passions is physical health and physical fitness and all of that sort of thing. And so she's integrated that with her practice of just really kind of thinking about those kinds of things. And then there's other people out there that do, more holistic kinds of stuff. And so figuring out the different directions you can go. I interviewed somebody yesterday just about low-dose ketamine treatments. That's a whole new area of psychotherapy and how we're helping people and that sort of thing. And so that might be something that somebody would find to do, but also it could bring in more income for themselves through the referrals, but also being able to refer out and be able to create income that way. So
I get really excited about AI and just the possibilities that we can use to leverage our expertise. I think that's when you start cooking with gas, when you've got an understanding, just a basic understanding of what is out there and what tools are out there, and then how to take that expertise that can become a moat for you and separate you from every other entrepreneur out there that's using AI, and really start to feel like, okay, I don't have to be in the chair every single hour now to have a sustainable practice. And it's not just one-to-one. Now it's one-to-many.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's the key, is really figuring out those things that can help you do the one-to-many way of doing things. And really, too, just looking outside our little, world of therapy and that sort of thing. I mean, just like listening to business leaders out there. I mean, like when I first got started, a podcast I listened to all the time was Pat Flynn's podcast on passive income. And so you get ideas from that and how to do that and just kind of learn that world. And the other thing too, I think is really important to remember is to break it down into small pieces. I think what keeps us from doing things sometimes is we look at the picture of things and say, oh, this is just way too much. I just can't do that. Well, it's like I tell clients sometimes, how do you eat an elephant? Well, it's one bite at a time. Not a great metaphor, but being able to just break things down into smaller pieces and figuring out what those pieces are. And then even when you do that, that can take you in different directions, a little different tangents and rabbit trails that can evolve into a whole lot of other things.
When you're in private practice, one of the episodes that we did was called The Shawshank Conundrum. It's about, if you've ever seen the movie, where he's digging that hole behind the poster slowly. And that's how I see therapists building out their passive income streams, is that they're trying to do it in between sessions, right? They're trying to, build their Etsy empire in between patient A and patient B. And Sometimes reality, I think, just gets in the way where you're like, I got to go eat lunch between session
Right,
one and
right.
two. And I know I'm a 7 on the Enneagram, so I get afflicted with the shiny ball syndrome. I'm always excited about these new
Yeah,
ideas, but it can become
right,
analysis
right.
paralysis because there are so many things that it's hard to roll out one particular thing. I want to do all the
Right.
things. And so, how did you make that shift when you're in private practice and maybe you've hired some extra clinicians at that point, and so you have a little bit. Is it just that where you're able to just open up a couple hours and then you're able to focus on that and you just have amazing focus to see that stuff through?
I do not have amazing focus. I will. I'll own that. Yeah, I've got a little bit or a lot of ADHD, and so I get very easily distracted by things. But again, you find those things that just really catch your attention, and then allow yourself to just kind of go down that trail to kind of find out more about that. Going back to the example of the Google Workspace, it used to be called G Suite, and I got really fascinated with that and just started looking at, oh, you can do this with it. Oh, you can do that with it. And so I just started kind of putting it together and pulling just all the different smaller pieces together. There's a writer, his name was Joseph Campbell. One of his famous quotes that I love is says that follow your bliss. And when you do that, doors will open up for you where you didn't even realize there were doors. I'm paraphrasing that quote, but that's essentially what I've found has happened is that you find the thing, whatever it might be. It just might be small. It might be, like you mentioned, an Etsy store, oh, I've got these great worksheets and stuff that I want to sell on Etsy for other therapists. And so then you start looking into, okay, how do I create an Etsy store? And you start doing those little things. At least for me, that was energizing. And so again, kind of repeating myself, but find those things that energize you, those things that just really, like I said, bring you joy, just really you can get excited about, things that you can get lost in. Those are the kinds of things that I think to look for yourself.
I love the Joseph Campbell quote. We must be willing to let go of the life we've planned as to have the life that's waiting for us. I remember having that in my
Yes,
office for
yes,
so long, and
yes,
it
yes.
applies to so many stages of life where you're so hell bent on it going this way, and you're like, no, this is the way
Right,
it's gonna go. This is the path of least
right.
resistance. Yeah.
Right. And I think for most of us, and I know this has been true for me, is the hard part is when you face uncertainty, you don't know what's coming next. You maybe reach a place where you are just kind of feel like you've hit a wall and you just, I'm not sure what I want with this. But I think learning to sit with that discomfort, I mean, it's stuff we tell our clients all the time, just around how we feel. Learning to sit with that discomfort and learning to ride through those kind of waves of discomfort, those waves of, grief, if you will, or anxiety or whatever, is learning just to ride through that. And also, one of my own conviction is that when you're on the right path, things will just open up for you. It'll just all of a sudden become easy. And so I think sometimes we have to go down different trails and go down the wrong path for a while, but you backtrack and you find another path along the way.
Right. I know that you're a man of the cloth. I don't know what the term is.
Yeah, I'm a clergy person.
Clergy.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I know that in your clinical practice, it doesn't necessarily, it's not one of those, you're not like a Christian based counseling practice. And you can tell too when you're talking about sort of emotional regulation of those times of uncertainty. But for a second, I want to shift to that spirituality and faith and how that keeps us grounded. I think, in my best times, I've noticed that I will have a practice every morning where I'll sort of meditate and I'll say, all right, God's in charge. You're not in charge. You're just seeing what he's got planned for the day, and do my best to be of service and remove me of my character defects and all of that. Right. And those are my best days. And that's usually when I am at my best self. And then by about noon, I'm white knuckling the wheel. Like, we're going to take this over here. This is what we're doing, right?
Right.
So
Right.
I wonder, as I have listened to you over the years, I wonder if that has to be something that helps keep you anchored, because you do give that presence of just feeling really anchored and not like unhinged at times, which I feel like. So do you feel like your faith plays a big role in that?
I would say yes. In my title as a clergy person, I'm in the clergy person in the Episcopal Church. So I don't know, some people are very familiar with that. It's what became of the Church of England in the United States. We're really considered a very progressive church. We're affirming of LGBTQ issues and have women clergy and all of those kinds of things. And so, number one, it fits my values that I grew up with. I grew up as a pastor's son, so I grew up around church stuff. So it's all very familiar to me. But I think it's to kind of get to your question, Colleen, I think in my way of thinking, this is me, and I don't have any need to force onto anybody else what I believe or what I think. But what I have found for myself is that it's not about what you believe, it's about the way of life that you create for yourself. And, in the Christian perspective, you follow what Jesus did. And other traditions, it might be Buddha, it might be Muhammad, whatever. You follow that path, and what you find is that it kind of goes back to things will start opening up for you and you'll be able to see things in a different light. But I think also important in all of that is the importance of building a community. Faith for me is not a solo activity. It's about being with people that think like you, that, have the same values. They are concerned about you. They love you. They are with you through the hard times. They are there to support you. And that to me is, I'll just say that's where God lives, is in that.
Yeah.
And so being able to connect to that. And then there's also, I think for me, there's a mystery to it all. I mean, there's stuff that I just can't explain. And so it's just that kind of that spiritual kind of side of things. And so yeah, that's what works for me. And I think everybody has to find their own path through all of that. And there's no definitive way or right way to do that.
If you look anthropologically, in every society, there was always some form of tribal worship. There was always some form of community that was cultivated, and the way that they worshiped whatever the thing was or whatever their faith was, it was together with other people. So, I think it's no mistake that we have these mirror neurons and networks that are lit up when we're in the presence of other people.
Right. It's truly an experiential kind of thing.
Yeah.
I can't empirically prove the existence of God. I can't scientifically prove that out for you, but I can just say, okay, this has been my life experience and this is the meaning I put to it. Yeah. And so, yeah.
And when you talk about the spiritual principles of just being an entrepreneur and being a clinician, one thing that I think is really important, another facet of that besides community, is being of service. And I think it's human nature to always think like, what do I need today? You wake up and you go, what do I need today? I need to pay my bills, or I need to do this for my kids, or I need to lose weight. What do I need? How do I feel? And when you're in a really good spiritual path, you're thinking about other people, like what does she need today? And I think that can inform business, right? Like if you're always creating your products around what is going to give to people, right? If I'm doing this podcast and I'm like, is a therapist actually going to listen to this and go, that just blew my mind. I am so inspired by that. That was a great takeaway. That makes me be so much better in what I'm doing in these passive income streams versus like, I just need a way out. And coming at it from sort of selfish needs.
What helps with that longevity is when you're going back to what I said towards the beginning, is figuring out what is your why? Why are you doing this? If you're doing it just to make money, I would say go find something that you enjoy doing that will make you money and probably make you more money than this. I mean, that sort of thing. And so, it's figuring that out for yourself and doing your own work.
You mentioned that book, Oliver Burkeman's 4,000 Weeks.
Yes.
That is one of my favorite books. And
oh, yes.
Okay, so tell me, about when did you read that book, and what did it shift anything for you?
It was probably about this time last year when I started reading it or became familiar with it. And I'm sure I learned about it through some podcast I was listening to at the time. I drank the Kool-Aid and bought into this whole idea of, I've got to be productive. I've got to use my time well. I've got to have good time management skills. And there was a point in my life at which I needed that. I needed to learn those things because things were falling through the cracks and I felt so unorganized. And so not throwing it all out, but I think just what really stuck with me is we can create these to-do lists of all the things we want to accomplish and need to do or think we should do, using air quotes. And in the end, is that really what you want? And the truth of the matter is that most of us are just focused on the day-to-day. We're just I need to get this done today. And so what that book did for me was it took the pressure off, and that I didn't have to perform for anybody or meet some sort of standard that it was just given to me by others or whatever. But just really being able to recognize that. And then also, time is finite. I mean, we've only got, like he put, 4,000 weeks in a lifetime. And so how do I want to spend that time, particularly at this stage in life? And I don't want to spend it by putting a lot of undue pressure on myself about things that really aren't that important to me to begin with.
You think about how he talks about society after society for thousands of years. Everybody's just hard working at whatever this thing is. I got to just do this thing, whether you're a coal miner and I got to get this coal, and then you die, right? And it's like, I hope you had a good time while you were here, right? And that woke me up, I think, out of this trance that I think grad school can often put you in, which is like, tomorrow is not promised. And especially post-COVID, I think we're all reminded of that. And it really I think that's where it made the shift for me, where I thought, how do I build a more sustainable lifestyle where I'm feeling filled up at the end of the day and inspired? And what is my why, as you said?
Right. And figuring out what recharges your batteries. All of us need to take downtime doing those things that bring you meaning and just bring you joy and find enjoyment in.
When you created your podcast, I imagine the first couple, maybe months or even year, you were maybe not doing it as consistently. You just would record whenever or put something out there, that sort of thing. And then probably got more consistent and more systemized as you went. And then it became sort of this like media empire, this network, right? It's not just a podcast that you're doing. Tell me about that.
Yeah.
Was that you figuring out how you could help other people that were doing their own podcast? Was it the business acumen that you have where you're like, well, wait a minute, let's figure out how this makes the most sense? How did that evolve?
Yeah, I think it's some of all of that. Big theme for me in my life now is just the importance of community and having people that you can share ideas with, that you can lean on, and all of that sort of thing. And so what I was finding, one thing is kind of like with private practice, people were contacting me about, oh, well, how do I start a podcast? You've been doing it a while, listen to your podcast. How could I start one? And so that was part of it. And then just having several of my friends and colleagues and people that I've associated with in this space over the years, them having podcasts and really me helping them get some traction with that. And then also opportunities to monetize their podcast. And so that's one of the things that we've been able to do with the network is help create a clearinghouse, if you will, for people that want to sponsor podcasts or do paid advertising on a podcast. As much as anything, I wanted to just kind of put that network together to help with that. I'm still figuring all of that out. As I like to say, I'm building the airplane as I fly it. We're getting some traction. Some podcasts have stayed with us. Some have dropped off. But just like most everything I do, once I start something, well, I just keep doing it,
When you were early on into private practice, and I think growing a group practice, and some of the things you talked about were just some hiring mistakes, things you were paying contractors way too much. You realize that later on and making a lot of these mistakes. If you had to pick out the most salient things that come up for you now that could help other early career clinicians that are maybe thinking about making this shift, what would be those takeaways?
I sound like a broken record if people listen to my podcast, but the importance of knowing your numbers and knowing what's really practically going to work. I think that's one thing, is really understanding how much money is coming in, how much is going out, how much do you need for yourself, of having a lot of clarity over, okay, in order to maintain my lifestyle or the way I want to live, what sort of income do I need from my practice, that sort of thing. I think too, being able to hire the right people, finding people that have the same values, that really kind of have your same vision for your practice, that's an important piece as as well. The other piece that I think is real important that people don't think about is having enough money in reserve in order to sustain yourself when there are slumps in income or slumps in what's happening or someone quits or whatever might happen, is building that nest egg early on. And that's what I did when I went from a solo practice to group practice. I was still working a part-time job within my church context. I was the coordinator for Episcopal Appalachian Ministries. And so I was doing that job part-time and then running my practice. So I had income coming in, and so I used that to live on, but then any income that I made for my practice, I went ahead and put into savings and kind of stockpiled what I did. Then I made the transition into full-time private practice and then also bringing on clinicians in my practice.
Yeah, I think that the numbers piece is so important, and no one teaches you that when you're in grad school, is looking at a P&L and understanding what your margins are and your OPEX and all of that. Beyond that, I also got in the habit of, or making a bad mistake of thinking I was now working on the business instead of in the business, and I was just running payroll. And, looking back on that, it's like, well, that's a $25 an hour job you can outsource if you're going to like Tim Ferriss's book, right? And so now I've just given myself a new job, not necessarily a better job. I didn't want to run payroll. And so knowing the numbers from that standpoint too, like what's your ROI? If you're spending an hour doing payroll that somebody else could have done, and that hour you could have built content for a course that sells itself. That's a better leverage of your time, right?
Right. I think the other thing, too, that has been a big thing for me, and I really learned this from a client that I've worked with for a long time over the years who does real estate investing. And the whole premise is you don't have to do these big leaps in growth, small increments of making money, of doing different things, and taking the urgency out of it all for yourself. And that goes back to that book, 4,000 Weeks. I think we create for ourselves urgency about things that there's really no urgency. And so making sure that we're secure where we are, getting started. Don't jump into private practice if you're working for an agency. I like to say, don't quit your day job too quickly until you know that what your private practice is going to be sustainable and that you can operate all of that without putting a big financial pressure on yourself. And so I think by taking that out and taking the urgency out of all of it just goes a long way in just being able to move through everything.
A lot of people talk about, they'll have podcasts and people come on that are financial people and they talk to therapists about knowing their numbers. And I think the block becomes, okay, well, I'm not a CPA, so I don't know my numbers, or I didn't know how to run a P&L until I had a mentor that showed me how to do it. But I feel like today with AI, I mean, I can put my P&L in an LLM and it will spit out for me more information than I ever got from a bookkeeper or my CPA in terms of this is where you're going, this is your trending. And I'll say, I'm thinking about doing this. So how much would I need to make sure that this is sustainable over time? Well, you could take back this many hours and you could start to do it this way. And it doesn't have to be a black or white binary thing of you either are an MBA and you understand finance or you've got to hire some expensive financial planner. I think nowadays we do have a lot of tools at our fingertips that can help consult.
Right. I think too, it's really not that complicated. I mean, if I figured it out, it's not that complicated. I mean, and so when you understand the basics around accounting and just understand around your assets and your equity and all of that sort of thing, it starts to make sense. And then another big thing that was just a huge, just kind of mind-blowing kind of thing that happened for me was learning about Profit First when I first read that book and then had Mike McAllowitz on the podcast. That was a huge game changer.
Yeah.
When I really figured out, okay, it's about allocating percentages rather than specific dollar amounts.
Right.
And so then it made sense.
Right.
And then it took a lot of pressure off.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So last question I have for you, and I know you've spoken about maybe shifting into retirement. What does that actually look like for you?
I don't know that I will ever, I'm not going to just sit on the beach and drink margaritas. That's not my thing. I'm staying on the go. But I'd probably look into selling my group practice or merging it with another practice and then continue to do the podcast and consulting and that sort of thing as long as I can do that. But even now, I mean, now that my group practice is very self-sustaining, it's really running well. I'm really, really proud of the group of people that I've got. It's a small practice. We have, excluding myself, we have 5 clinicians. 4 are full-time, 1 is very part-time, and an admin person. And it basically runs itself. That has been a good thing. And so I'm already doing kind of retirement kinds of stuff. I'm traveling a lot more, going to be going to Patagonia in January.
Wow.
And so that's going to be, just doing those bucket list things while I can.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, Gordon, thank you for sharing your wisdom and your heart with us today. You are such a model for what's possible when therapists combine business acumen with compassion.
Awesome. This is great, Colleen. Thanks for having me.
If our listeners want to hear more and they haven't heard you yet, where would they go?
So you can go to anywhere you listen to podcasts, and it's the Practice of Therapy podcast. And you can also go to my website, just practiceoftherapy.com. And also the PsychCraft Network is just psychcraftnetwork.com. You can find everything you need there.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, Gordon.
Thank you.